Hello, my name is Tashi Chidway, a graduate student in the Classics Department at Johns Hopkins University, and I am the current chair of the Pegasus Mythology Committee. In this session, we'll begin by going over some logistical information about the Pegasus exam. After that, two teachers who serve on the Pegasus Committee will present lessons they use to help students prepare for the exam. A big thank you to Katharine and Lisa for sharing your time and expertise with us. The study of mythology allows us to understand our world, global literature, and art, while also helping us to make classical connections to contemporary culture. The Pegasus National Mythology Exam strives to make mythology accessible to all students, grades 3 through 8. The Pegasus National Mythology Exam welcomes all students of classical mythology. Students in grades 9 through 12 should register for the Medusa National Mythology Exam. First, here are some important dates for the exam. Don't forget to register. You have the option to register for either a print exam or an online exam. The Pegasus exam is designed for students in grades 3 through 8. The exam is divided into levels 1 through 3, each aligned with specific grade levels and corresponding exam components. For example, students in grades 3 and 8 complete questions 1 through 30, which focuses on general mythology, primarily the Olympian gods. Students in grades 5 and 6 are required to complete the first 30 questions plus 10 questions from the thematic section. The same structure applies to grades 7 and 8 with the addition of 10 extension questions. The thematic and extension questions are based on our annual theme. This year's theme is the underworld. Be sure to consult our bibliography for specific pages in Dallaire's Book of Great Myths related to the underworld. You can also purchase our resource packet, which includes interactive classroom activities designed to reinforce the concepts and information presented on the tests. And it will be available on the ETC store, and I've put a little QR code there. Extension questions are designed to test students' understanding of the stories and how these ancient Greek myths connect to other disciplines beyond literature and classical studies. We've also included some sample extension questions in the bibliography for reference, as I put here. Now, without further ado, let's turn to Katharine from the Hockaday School to share her classroom activity. And please let me know when to move to the next slide.
Sure. Hi, I'm Katharine Gavitt. I teach middle school Latin and English in Dallas, Texas. And I wanted to talk today a little bit about the process that I use when I am creating stories in Latin to use with my students. So if we could go to the first slide. I find that reading stories about mythology in Latin to be the easiest way to introduce myths to students because it lets me continue to build on their language skills and keep practicing with them while at the same time engaging them with a story from mythology. And I find it very easy to incorporate these stories throughout the curriculum, whether that's something that we're doing together in class on an assignment, if they're doing work at home alone through homework, or even including a passage they've never seen before on an assessment and using that as a time to learn as well. So I wanted to look at some of the strategies I use that when I create these stories and adapt them from Latin. So if we go to the next slide. Um, before I start writing, I like to have a very clear goal in mind of what I want to focus on. With students who are very new to Latin, it can be very challenging to write Latin stories when their understanding of how a sentence functions is very limited. So I start by setting a very clear grammar objective of what I want students to focus on, whether that's the person of verbs or the case of nouns, something for to direct their attention as they are reading. And I also make a list for myself of limits that I have to have within sentences. You know, if I know that students don't know anything beyond object and direct object in cases with nouns, I write that down to remind myself as I'm writing to not make a sentence any more complicated than that. Then I look at the story I want to adapt. I know that I can't include all of it. I'm thinking, for example, when I was working on stories for the teaching packet for this exam, if I started on the Asclepius story, there's like 500 words in the Delaires section on that story, and I don't want to include 500 words in Latin. So I choose what details seem most relevant and important from the story and forgive myself to forget the rest of them. And finally, I make a list of words that students will never have encountered before to remember to define them and include in a glossary at the end. If we go to the next slide, here are the kind of tricks I've learned over the years to help with making a story a bit easier to understand. The first is making the sentences as short as possible and separating them into as many sentences as you want. There's no need for a student who's only been taking Latin for 2 months to have several different dependent clauses in a sentence. Separate it out into singular, short, 3, 4 word sentences. Dialogue is a great way to incorporate verbs of a variety of persons and can also make it easier for you. Sometimes I even like to write my stories as plays so that students can perform them, and it allows you to attribute each line of dialogue to a character without every single time having to say who is talking. Um, I will also say that you don't always have to be perfectly grammatically correct as things would appear in natural Latin. For example, we know that we would typically use the locative case rather than an ablative with in for things like cities. But students likely have not encountered the locative case before when they are very early in Latin, and saying in Rome is easily translatable even if they haven't learned the ablative case yet. And it's also okay to gloss phrases if you want to include something grammatically challenging that students aren't aware of yet. And then finally, if we could go to the next slide, here's how I make sure my students are set up for success when it comes to reading a story. At the very beginning of the year, I have a lesson with students on how to use a dictionary in order to help them know what to do when they encounter a word they've never seen before. I did not realize until very recently that this was something I needed to do until I noticed students looking in the back half of a dictionary that had English to Latin to find a word in Latin. But having time with them to show them how to look through a dictionary and how to pick out the correct definition of the word helps them not feel overwhelmed when they see a bunch of words they've never heard of before. I also make sure every time before we read a story together that we review conventional word order so that students know where to start when they are reading. Like reminding them to look at the end of the sentence to find a verb can be helpful to help them approach a longer sentence. And then finally, I like to create a clear system for marking and annotating the Latin passage, especially if I've given them a clear grammatical objective beforehand. Even just saying, before you read, if you will highlight every verb in the sentence, or if you will underline all your subjects and draw a circle around all the direct objects, giving them something to do before they start reading in order to start breaking those sentences down. If you would like to introduce more stories to your students this year, but you don't have time to write all of them yourself, we have a number available in the teaching packet for this year. So if we go to the last slide, here are all the stories from the thematic section that are included in the Underworld teaching packet this year and their grammatical focus. These could also be easily adapted if you wanted to change, for example, the tense of some of the verbs on your own. But here the work has been done for you if you are looking to include more mythology in your lessons. I hope you found this helpful. And I will turn things over now to Lisa.
Yes, thank you so much, Catherine. This is really helpful. Yes, okay, thank you, Lisa. And thank you again, Catherine, both of you for donating your time and expertise. This is incredibly helpful, and I really encourage all our viewers to please look at the resource packet. Our committee has worked very hard on creating this, and it was working very hard to create the exam for you and your students. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on the email that's on the slide. You can also visit the the website listed for ETC and Pegasus, and same thing with the QR code.